Bom dia, pessoal. Aqui quem está falando é o André Ota, sou CEO da Origem e sócio da Darwin Startups. E estamos aqui abrindo o 4º dia do Case Startup Summit. Então, pessoal, sejam muito bem-vindos. Hoje a gente tem um convidado internacional, o Mark Negger. Ele é cofundador do Startup Weekend. Ele vai contar um pouco mais sobre a história dele. Então, pessoal, sejam muito bem-vindos. Esse talk é oferecido pela Techstars e Origin by Darwin, junto com a Darwin Startups. Então, sem mais delongas, gostaria de convidar aqui Preta Emeline, da Techstars, e Mark Negger. Pessoal, também teremos a legenda. Então, para quem precisar, a gente terá legendas em português aqui no nosso vídeo. Tranquilo? Então, Preta, é com você.
Bom dia. Vou começar a falar em português e inglês. Vou me apresentar aqui. Hi, talking about myself, I am an enthusiastic entrepreneur with a background in managing strategy for community building. As the regional manager for Brazil at Techstars, I help build thriving startup ecosystem through the country. Andre?
So, hello everybody. I'm André Ota. I'm CEO at Origin and by Darwin and partner at Darwin. Darwin is an ecosystem that helps startups succeed. We have 2 accelerator programs here in Brazil. Darwin, which is focused on software-centric startups, and Hearts, which is focused on hardware-centric startup. Origin is a company that helps people become more entrepreneur through entrepreneurial education. And I'm going to introduce you guys to Mark Negger. Mark Negger is the co-founder of Startup Weekend and former CEO at Up Global, startup that has some programs, Startup America, Startup Weekend, Startup Digest, and Startup Next. In 2015, Techstars acquired Up Global, and Mark served as the Chief Community Officer there for some time. Mark has traveled to nearly 50 countries working with startup ecosystems builders and early-stage startups. He's currently on a mission to help find new ways for venture capital and accelerator programs to support and engage with founders that don't fit the traditional VC profile. So, welcome, Mark Negger. Could you please introduce yourself and say hello to everybody.
Hey everybody, good morning. No, thank you, Preta. Thank you, Andre, for having me. It's been an amazing journey, and honestly, to have been asked to come join you guys today was a real honor. It's fun to be able to reconnect, and with Brazil having more startup weekends than anywhere else in the world right now, it feels completely appropriate. So honored to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Mark, I met you for the first time in Rio de Janeiro at Startup Weekend Summit in 2013. And then in 2014, I joined Up Global to open its Brazilian office along with Tony Celestino. And to be honest, this period changed my life because I felt so connected to the Startup Weekend vision, purpose, and network that I ultimately made it one of my main focus would be help Brazil become more entrepreneurial. So, Mark Negger, thanks for changing my life. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. To start, could you please tell us about your story and the beginning of Startup Weekend?
Yeah, sure. And Andre, yeah, really, truly my pleasure here. And you guys have done incredible work. The origin story, ironically, somewhere around here, Andrew Hyde is the person who originally started the idea with Startup Weekend. And Andrew, he's actually staying at my house right now in his van in the driveway. So funny, here in Colorado. But Andrew started originally in Boulder in Colorado, and he started to grow it and had a number of events around the world. I attended one of those events up in Seattle, and at the time I had a different job. My friend at the time, Clint, we went to that event and we had all these ideas of how, we thought we could do it better, right? Just being the naive entrepreneurial types we were. And we ended up driving through Colorado from Seattle on a road trip. We met with Andrew and we told him all of our crazy ideas. And Andrew was like, great, go for it. Why don't you run with it? And at the time, he gave us a lot of authority to experiment with things, and some of those things started working. And just like you guys and so many other people around the world, we really fell in love with it. We saw that power. When you see a startup weekend happen and you see how it can really change somebody's, not just experience for a weekend, but fundamental outlook on life, that doesn't leave you. That never leaves you, right? That sticks with you forever. And the ability to, our vision was, why doesn't this exist everywhere around the world? Part of that time, I had actually been laid off from a company. This was on the heels of the 2008 recession. I had no job. I was on unemployment. And I said, great, I'm not looking for another job. I'm going to try to make this my company. So Andrew really handed us the keys. Clint Nelson and I, and then later Frank Nuragat ended up buying the entity from Andrew. And we ended up, going out on a mission to change the world, to be naive as 20-something entrepreneurs at the time. And I was on unemployment for a year and a half. It was really our founder journey. I had no money to my name. My girlfriend, now wife, Ashley, was paying the bills, making sure we actually ate real food. There were 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was, we really lived the startup and founder journey and bootstrapped it from the ground up. And along that process, we found a few through, and I think this is worth mentioning, and I'll stop after this, but getting those first customers, that first revenue, we knew we weren't going to charge entrepreneurs exorbitant amounts of money. Everybody knows that doesn't work. Entrepreneurs don't have money. We were entrepreneurs, so we knew very well that story. But we used the contact us form on the Sun Microsystems, which then got bought by Oracle. But Sun Microsystems, a big tech company out of Silicon Valley that no longer exists, and we got a response back, and we submitted a thing for sponsorship for $30,000, and that $30,000 changed our life and our trajectory. All of a sudden, we could pay some of the bills, pay off the credit card debt, right? And that helped us attract other sponsors. And then those sponsors attracted other sponsors. And then we got global sponsors. And then we found the Kauffman Foundation and Microsoft and Google and Twilio, MailChimp, some of the early supporters of Startup Weekend itself. SendGrid was another one of them. So a lot of the big names were also startups at the time, but they saw and they felt that the rawness of kind of the early days of the startup ecosystem movement here in the US. And ultimately, we were able to pay ourselves and build a real company and be part of something truly remarkable. And that's how I got to meet, both of you guys and Tony at the time, one of the first international offices for Startup Weekend. So a little bit of the connection there.
This is very, very really cool. I also want to say the Startup Weekend has changed my life and that of thousands of people in Brazil. When I experienced 6 years ago, it was a really journey that I could live. Especially, like fostering the entrepreneurial or community development. So my question, I wrote recently in the Startup Weekend book that is something you written that is very enlightening about the future of the Startup Weekend. You mentioned that it is a movement that is at the forefront of innovative development in the business world, permanently shaping all we know and changing the quality of life for the whole planet. I really agree with all of this. Almost 10 years after the book was written, what do you expect to happen with Startup Weekend and new businesses, considering the ever-growing tech focus in business and behaviors around the world?
Great question, Freta, and it is so fun to be able to look back on the book or the manifesto, the Startup Weekend manifesto. If you look back, we wrote down our vision, our mission. We stole that all from Jim Collins' Good to Great, and Salesforce had a thing called a manifesto, and Valve. And so we just copied a lot of those moves. But what it did, it really gave us clarity and forced us to dive deep. Like, what is entrepreneurship truly? When you ask that question, you kind of unpack. It's about creating. It's about solving problems, right? And that's human. That's all of us. We're born that way. It's in our DNA as humans to create. And the values that go along with entrepreneurship are the things that we thrive on also, right? Risk taking, creating value for others, right? Creating jobs, creating value for your community, for society, for your economy, for yourself, for your family, right? And all of that is just truly and genuinely a virtuous cycle that is systemic to all of human society. And so, not commenting on the state of our politics in the world today, I think entrepreneurship even has the opportunity to shape democracies and countries and economies and societies in a way that we have not yet tapped into. So I look at what we wrote and what we're all a part of still today, and I think that the work's just getting started. I really think that the values of like inclusion, right, and diversity, those are things that are unique to this movement, entrepreneurship. And those are things that we can use to shape the companies we build, the communities we build, the governments that we're a part of, the world as a whole. And it's truly remarkable to feel like you actually have some agency over that as an entrepreneur. And I think now more than ever, it's not just an opportunity, it's almost a responsibility. I remember the very first time that I traveled to Malaysia in 2010. That was maybe when my eyes really opened, because Preta, you asked about technology, right? I traveled to Malaysia and Dash over there. If you go to Malaysia and talk to anybody about the startup ecosystem for the last decade, Dash's name will come up, just like you guys in Brazil. and Dash took me around to a series of startup weekends, and one of them was in a town called Kelantan. And it was outside of Penang, and it was at a university, and it was an outdoor university, and almost nobody even owned a computer. And so I was showing up to be the Startup Weekend facilitator. And all of a sudden, my contacts coming from Seattle and New York and all these other tech places, I had to understand like entrepreneurship. No, like this is about starting a bakery on the corner. This is about starting, it doesn't matter if it's a lifestyle business, a mom and pop business. Even in those businesses now, right? You have to have a Facebook profile. You have to be able to market. Right? You have to have a business plan. The fundamentals and the frameworks that we imply, things like lean methodology, it's irrelevant of technology. That said, technology is just a fundamental part of any successful venture at some level in today's world. And that's not going to change. That's only going to accelerate.
Nice. So Mark, in 2013, we had like 19 startup weekends in Brazil. And in 2019, we had almost 200 startup weekends. And it's amazing. And we know that we have in our audience right now a lot of startup weekend organizers, startup weekend community leaders, and also startup weekend attendees. And for us, like Brazil is now the country with the most startup weekends in the world. And I think with the highest NPS score, Preta can tell us if I'm right or not. And you traveled to nearly 15 countries working with startup ecosystem builders. So in your opinion, why do you think the numbers and the quality of startup weekends in Brazil are so high? And what's your perspective on the Brazilian ecosystem?
Good question, because I got to spend a little bit of time there and obviously work closely with you and Tony and some of the other folks. So I have a little bit of insight, but maybe before this, I did a little research on the state of venture capital in Brazil, so I'll hit that too. I'm glad I did that. This is a good place to inject it. But Andre, do you remember the white paper we did with Google for Entrepreneurs, the 5 ingredients of a thriving startup ecosystem?
Yes, like culture, density, capital, government, and
exactly
talent.
Right. So I think that is still just as true as ever. The only addition I'd make. So why is Brazil and the ecosystem doing so well? I think it's those. You have all 5 of those ingredients are doing pretty well. Plus, you have good leadership. You have good leaders like you guys who are willing to step in and take the baton and champion that message and do it relentlessly. I know you guys have a really difficult job, and you probably don't make enough money, right? Nobody doing this work. It's one of those almost thankless jobs. So I can both empathize and want to recognize the importance of that work. But like just breaking those down for a second, culture, right? The Brazilian culture, I mean, entrepreneurship's in your DNA. It's very ingrained. It's not something that is as common in several other cultures around the world. So I think that's a real plus. Talent. Your universities are churning out students at record pace, right? You have high education. You have a lot of folks in the tech world, right? You're participating on in a global market, more and more so. So the government regulation side is what that really kind of speaks to. And I think, and I looked this up, the GDP is somewhat static in Brazil, like most of the world right now. It's the citizens are taking that into their own hands, and that's the overlap of the culture where you guys are wanting and demanding to participate in a global capacity, right? And the government's not stopping you. There's other countries where that's not the case, and so I think that's a real plus. The density, I think about it as infrastructure, density and infrastructure. So the co-working, the broadband. I remember you guys talking in the early days a lot about the co-working spaces opening up in Brazil and wanting to be a part of that. And right, it's pretty ubiquitous now. If you are starting entrepreneur today, that's just par for the course. You expect that. 10 years ago, those were very new concepts still, in many parts of the world. And then the last piece is the capital. And that's where I looked at the venture capital is off the charts, right? And I looked up 1.3 billion in 2018 and 2.34 billion in 2019. So, almost doubling from 2018 to 19. I don't know what COVID's done to 2020. Nobody should count 2020 as anything, but I think you have the fuel, the rocket fuel is it's following a lot of everything that we just talked about, the talent and the culture and the global participation and the infrastructure that's already in place. So, and the leadership like you guys. So really applaud you guys again.
Yeah.
Great.
There are 2 things that we learned from you guys. One is like the give first culture. So help a lot of people expecting nothing in return, and also we also do what we call like trainers. So Preta and I always like training some community leaders and saying that his job is like to train other community leaders. So that's working very well.
Yeah, it sounded clearly the numbers show that.
Great. So yeah, here in Brazil, we say that Startup Weekend has 3 truths. It develops talents, business, and communities. So we split that all over Brazil for everyone that is involved with Startup Weekend. And everyone started to see that as a really important mindset to explore around Startup Weekend. And I also believe that Startup Weekend helps to, as you said, Mark, at the beginning, to democratize entrepreneurship for people who have no affinity or knowledge of startup, but changing a little bit of the knowledge base and experience in the entrepreneur ecosystem, talking about VCs and accelerator participation. What have you noticed are the main characteristics of this relationship between the ecosystem and the Startup Weekend community? Where is this relationship between startup companies and the startup community headed?
Yeah, good question. And I think I want to bring it back to everybody says they want more startups, right? Both sides of the political spectrum in almost anywhere in the world will agree that, you know, entrepreneurship is good because it creates companies that create jobs, that stabilize society, give people, you know, meaning and purpose, and those people then participate in the schools and the government, right? And it's really one of the fundamental building blocks of society again. But here's the fundamental question that I think Startup Weekend answers, and it is the relationship with the community. The question is, where do entrepreneurs come from? Right? Where do you go to find them? If you say, hey, I want to create 1 million more entrepreneurs, how do you do that? Is it all about the venture capital? No, because people need to learn how to like build a company before they're investable, right? Is it lawyers that like file the patents and whatever, and the scientists? No, because those tend to not be the actual entrepreneurs. Is it universities? No, they serve a very specific role in education. Well, they play a key role in that. They're not actually, their goal, their directive is not to produce entrepreneurs. Not to mention most entrepreneurs, good ones, tend to be the ones that maybe don't spend as much time going through the whole system that we build in our societies. But you go to your communities to find entrepreneurs. And I think Startup Weekend is that community. You know, it exists in a way that creates access to entrepreneurship. So people don't just read about it, they can actually feel it, experience it, learn what it feels like to fail, learn what a pivot is, like feel what a pitch is, understand how to recruit a team, understand and know the difference between when a team's working well together and producing things and when they're completely a mess. Right? You deal with the human side, the kind of the science side, and the real world aspect around it all. You model entrepreneurship as a way to teach it. It's just like saying you can't teach somebody how to play football, soccer, by reading a book or just watching it on TV. You have to get out there and kick the ball with real people, right? And entrepreneurship's the same way, and it's a muscle. And you have to exercise that muscle. And again, Startup Weekend is the catalyst for that, because once they attend something like that, you come out of it asking yourself, all right, what next? But now you at least have a fundamental awareness of what's important and what good next steps might be for it all. And again, I think that's where you kind of get the whole ecosystem, the community popping up to support people. And it just like Startup Weekend is a great feeder for accelerator programs, not necessarily the companies, but the people that go to them, right? There's a lot of data from Startup Weekend to Techstars that supports that.
Yeah, awesome. And Mark, in the beginning of the Startup Weekend, we had somewhere around, I think, 10% of female attendees. And now we have like somewhere around 40 or more %. And Startup Weekend always worked very hard to increase the diversity in the startup communities. We had some examples such as Startup Weekend Women, Startup Weekend Favela, Startup Weekend Black, Startup Weekend LGBT+, and etc. So why is diversity so important to the community, and how the community leaders how can community leaders continue to support diversity in their local community?
Right. This is one of the most important things, especially a lot of the things that have happened in the US recently, right? It's top of mind. I'm very proud to look back on the work that Startup Weekend and Techstars and the startup community in general has done around this. But hosting these, Startup Weekend women, for example, being able to watch that number increase, everybody knew it was a problem to have a bunch of, dudes in a room trying to build companies, right? and to be able to have watched that number go from 10 to 40, even close to 50% in some markets, right? That's a powerful thing. So why? What really drove that? Number one, and I think the most important, is the statistics show it's good business. It's just better for everybody. It's better for society, the consumers, it's better for the businesses, the performance, right? You look at the diversity, the makeup of the board, the team, even the customer base, right? All of that data points to it's just the smart thing to do. So now you have a really objective tool to look at the cultural things, right, and apply that, because it's you can kind of take anybody's views on any side of that and make it super objective, because it's not just the right thing to do. It's plain as day that it's the best thing to do. And I think that goes back to the earlier conversation too around values. When, as part of a movement in Startup Weekend, helping really catalyze a real movement around entrepreneurship, making an explicit value out of that really helps. We feel it, and I still feel it as a responsibility, because I think you can have a movement, and there's other movements in the world today. Not a lot of them have been as thoughtful or intentional about having a value like inclusion and diversity, and then having a specific strategy to support it, like all of these vertical or themed events that spit out real data to show that it's having meaningful change. And so I think that's just a lot of thoughtful people that have participated in the movement, and a lot of communities, leaders like you, that can look at that and be like, yes, this is important. I'm going to host this in my community, right? So it becomes just a really, really powerful, scalable tool, centered back on the value of not just what's right, but the power of entrepreneurship too.
Great. I think that I have time for one more question. So for entrepreneurs and founders that come out of Startup Weekend in Brazil, who still do not know how to start engage with an accelerator or a VC firm, what kind of advice can you provide based on your journeys? What are some good practices? How can they best interact with these players?
Yeah, I think great question. I think the number one thing is good communication and a great practical. If you're working as an entrepreneur in a startup or a founder of a startup, the number one thing you can do to foster relationships with any type of stakeholder, be it an accelerator, a VC, or a mentor that has really relevant experience, it's good communication. And the best way to do that is updates, right? Send a monthly update, a quarterly a month update, an every other month update. I don't care, just do it and be consistent about it. Be thoughtful about what you're tracking, be honest about what's working, what's not, right? Because all of those stakeholder groups, especially anybody who's been an entrepreneur before or worked with them, they don't expect you to be perfect. What they expect you to do is be really thoughtful, to be really honest with yourself and with others, and to communicate clearly about that. Because then all of a sudden you see that turn into good behaviors, like knowing when to ask for help, getting the help you need, right? If you don't communicate clearly, if you're not thoughtful about that, you generally don't find the resources, the help you need when you need it the most. And whether that's an accelerator or money or whatever, I just come back to that communication, and go check out updates. I can give you guys some links for how to do good updates They're short, they're concise, they're powerful. Do them.
Nice. Yeah. So for us, and also I don't know if we have shared that with the watchers. We can
Ota, we cannot hear you. Sorry, your connection is cutting a lot. You have like robotic voice.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me right now?
A little bit better. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, Mark, my next question is: why did you sell Upable Stars? How was the process?
Yeah, great question, and trust me, that was one that didn't happen lightly. Look, when we started in Seattle, we had a relationship with Techstars from the earliest days. The managing director there, Andy Sack, ran the Techstars program. He and Chris DeVore, and our first office that wasn't at our house was in the basement of Techstars in Seattle. And so we just had a long history with them. We knew there was a lot of cultural alignment. You know, I think Techstars really believes in the give first mentality, right? So a lot of the Techstars community was already engaged in working with Startup Weekends. We looked at some of the data of the number of attendees from Startup Weekends that were getting into the Techstars Accelerator programs. And it was something like it was like 2/3 of the participants had some connection or former involvement with Startup Weekend, right? Talk about where do entrepreneurs come from, the earlier one, right? There's just strong evidence there. And so but more fundamentally, why did we sell to begin with? We were a nonprofit, and a lot of our business model, so like any startup, we've thought about our business model a lot. Our business model was predicated on sponsorships and ticket sales. Back to that very early first principle, we know we're not going to make the money to fund the team and, just like, all of us that were doing the work through increasing all the ticket sales because we'd kill the number of people. We wouldn't fulfill the mission of democratizing entrepreneurship if that number was too high. We wanted buy-in, but we couldn't raise it too high. And then sponsorships. And the reality is corporate sponsorships, government sponsorships tend to be fairly fickle in times, on time cycles. So not the reliable business model. And you see that. And through the recession, what's one of the number one items on a corporate budget that gets slashed first? Marketing, sponsorships. In a COVID world, that's even more obvious, right? So the business model side, and this is also the frustrating part, is you see the value of that Startup Weekend creates in these communities. It is the launch point for so many entrepreneurs. And so it creates so much value, but it's unable to participate in that value creation. So why is it that it can create value, but not capture value to fund the business model? And so we went through the whole idea, do we launch our own funds? Do we launch our own accelerators? And we ultimately decided that no, we don't need to go out and compete with groups like Techstars and Y Combinator and 500 Startups in any way. Rather, we feel like it would be smarter to align ourselves with one of those. And given the much stronger values alignment with Techstars than some of the other big players at the time, it made a lot of sense. And from their side, they saw it as well, right? The data was very clear that it was not just a good thing that was aligned with values, but a smart business decision to kind of create that flywheel of entrepreneurship that their business model depends on. So ultimately, that was it. And looking back, we even looked at a few other players. I won't name them, but we absolutely made the right decision, because it's number one, if we wouldn't have sold it all, I think our sponsorship money would have dried up and we would have had really tough financial hardships. Or number two, we would have ended up working with somebody that would not have been able to support the organization as much as it has.
Great. Yeah, we are just on time. I want to say thank you, Mark. I think I could learn a lot during this talk. Thank you very much for joining this conversation, to spend your time with us. I'm sure Brazilian CLs, founders, players from the ecosystem would love to hear you. And hopefully to see you soon, next time, online or in person. I don't know, but thank you very much. Just to say, and I think that you can also say something before Andreota close this talk.
Great. No, thank you guys again. My hat's off to you. What you guys are doing is a great example, I think, for the entire world. And yeah, absolutely. I am very excited for the world to be past COVID and to be doing a number of online, in-person events. I think we're all a little zoomed out or video conferenced out, but it's something that we still need this day and age. So I'm glad that you guys are doing this event, but hopefully next time we can do it in person.
Yeah. So Mark, thank you very much. We hope we can see you here in Brazil, yeah, in the next years. So it was an honor to have you here with us. It's always good to talk with you and to hear about Startup Weekend story, because a lot of Brazilians are fan of Startup Weekend, and I'm sure that Startup Weekend has changed the life of a lot of people as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Preta. Thank you very much as well.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm going to switch to Portuguese so I can close here. So, pessoal, muito obrigado. Mark, muito obrigado. Foi muito bacana a gente poder bater esse papo. Então, continuem aí com a gente no Case Summit. Também temos os stands, então a Darwin, a Origem também tem uns stands, então vocês podem, caso vocês tenham dúvida ou pergunta, vocês podem nos procurar e aproveitem um dia, tenham um bom dia e um bom evento. Um grande abraço, pessoal.